Buon pomeriggio a tutti. Un caloroso benvenuto da parte del team DHL Express al webinar dedicato ai cambiamenti normativi recenti negli Stati Uniti d'America. Sono Irina Ciobanu, Product Manager in DHL Express Italy e durante la sessione di oggi sarò il vostro moderatore. Prima di iniziare vi informo che il webinar sarà registrato per poter essere condiviso con voi in seguito. I vostri microfoni e le vostre telecamere sono disattivati. È importante che sappiate che i dati dei partecipanti potrebbero essere visibili. Se non lo desiderate, non esitate a disconnettervi. Come disclaimer, voglio informarvi che i contenuti che tratteremo durante il webinar di oggi sono condivisi con voi solo a scopo informativo. Non rappresentano una consulenza legale, fiscale o professionale, come dal testo che vedete adesso sul vostro schermo. Permettetemi ora di introdurvi i nostri relatori di oggi. Martin Bloch, Managing Director, Sales and Marketing in DHL Express Italy, Maria Fernanda Font, responsabile del team DHL Express Customs and Regulatory Affairs nelle Americhe. Maria è collegata con noi dalla Florida e ci illustrerà in lingua inglese le modifiche doganali. Come relatore oggi abbiamo anche Andrea Sperati, Marketing Products and Sales Programs Manager in DHL Express Italy. Per quanto riguarda l'agenda di oggi, inizieremo con una breve introduzione da parte di Martin Bloch che ci spiegherà i motivi che ci hanno portato all'organizzazione di questo evento per voi nel contesto attuale del mercato e sulle tendenze che abbiamo osservato come reazione ai cambiamenti tariffari negli Stati Uniti da parte dei nostri clienti a seconda del settore. Passeremo poi la parola a Maria Fernanda Font, che ci spiegherà in lingua inglese i cambiamenti normativi e doganali, il loro impatto, portando alcuni esempi pratici. Maria parlerà anche dell'importanza dei dati nell'approcciare questi aggiornamenti normativi. A seguire, Andrea Sperati ci presenterà le soluzioni DHL Express che potete utilizzare per approcciare questi cambiamenti. Durante il webinar potete porci le vostre domande attraverso l'apposita funzionalità Q&A, Questions and Answers della piattaforma. Tutte le vostre domande saranno raccolte. Avremo un momento dedicato durante la sessione di oggi quando i nostri esperti risponderanno a quante più domande possibile. Se non riusciamo a rispondere alla vostra domanda durante il webinar di oggi, nei prossimi giorni riceverete le risposte a tutte le domande raccolte durante il webinar. Concluderemo la sessione con il riepilogo degli aspetti principali da parte di Martin Bloch e con alcune informazioni aggiuntivi per aiutarvi a tenere il passo con la situazione in continua evoluzione. Passo adesso la parola a Martin per introdurre la sessione di oggi.
Grazie Irina, buon pomeriggio a tutti. Andiamo avanti con la prossima slide. Grazie per la vostra partecipazione, potete ritornare alla slide precedente perché grazie. Io volevo condividere due slide con voi, da una parte il motivo per i webinar e poi un po' le tendenze che vediamo tra i clienti per affrontare un po' le nuove sfide nel mondo dei dati. Perché abbiamo deciso per organizzare questi webinar? Ovviamente ci sono stati vari cambiamenti nel mondo dei dati e ovviamente ha portato tanta complessità ormai in questo mondo. Quindi da una parte può portare una sfida che dobbiamo affrontare, dall'altra parte ovviamente potrebbe essere anche una buona opportunità. Quindi questo da un motivo. Dall'altra parte ovviamente è importante, noi prendiamo questo ruolo ovviamente per informare bene i nostri clienti, quindi è un mondo di dati dove noi siamo ovviamente molto vicini, siamo anche, possiamo darvi la consulenza e vogliamo ovviamente condividere questa conoscenza con voi. Oltre a questo è importante sappiate ovviamente l'impatto per questi dazi, ma non solo dal punto finanziario, anche capire bene che cosa dovete fare per creare un processo molto fluido e evitare gli ostacoli durante i processi di sdoganamento in US. Quindi per quei motivi è importante, abbiamo deciso per organizzare questo webinar. Poi andiamo avanti. abbiamo fatto un piccolo indagine tra i clienti per capire bene qual è un po' l'approccio da vari clienti su questo nuovo mondo di dazi, specialmente in US, e l'atteggiamento e i comportamenti dei nostri clienti. Destra sulla slide si vede i vari industrie e in sinistra si vede un po' la tendenza tra i vari clienti. Il primo approccio che vediamo da cliente è un approccio di attendere il nostro fare. Perché non è facile per cambiare la supply chain per il cliente, perché vuol dire per organizzare un altro magazzino oppure un altro impianto in US, quindi non perché i clienti non vogliono fare niente, ma ovviamente ci porta anche grandi investimenti per implementare un cambiamento. Quindi sicuro sono i clienti che aspettano un momento per capire come va e come possiamo andare avanti con i dazi in US. L'altra parte, la seconda riga, adeguare i prezzi. Ovviamente anche i clienti provano a trasferire gli aumenti di costi ai clienti, specialmente per esempio nel mondo di e-commerce, dove i clienti provano a trasferire questi costi ai clienti finali e così provano a coprire ovviamente i loro costi. Poi sospendere la consegna. Vuol dire un po' ridurre i volumi, ovviamente anche per ridurre i costi, non perché i clienti sono felici di fare questo tipo di interventi, ma con questo tipo di misure i clienti provano a ridurre i costi e dopo ovviamente devono decidere come vogliono andare avanti con la spedizione verso gli US. Quarto punto, un punto molto particolare perché grazie al periodo di grazia di 90 giorni sono anche i clienti che provano di aumentare lo scorto in US, perché ormai siamo in questo periodo specifico e i clienti provano di aumentare i loro volumi in US, probabilmente ovviamente una misura temporanea, perché dobbiamo aspettare che cosa succede dopo questo periodo di 90 giorni. Cambiare la modalità vuol dire anche i clienti stanno guardando come loro organizzano la loro modalità di trasporto. Usano noi, però possono anche altri tipi di modalità, quindi i clienti stanno guardando se loro devono guardare la loro modalità di trasporto e così provano di ridurre o di coprire i costi diversi. E l'ultimo punto, onestamente, sono clienti che fanno vari interventi e stanno cambiando onestamente la loro supply chain per organizzare supply chain diverse e così organizzano il loro business diverso verso specialmente US. Quindi questa ormai è un po' la situazione tra i vari clienti e l'approccio, ma come si deve affrontare le sfide in US, direi passo io la parola a Maria, cambio io anche in inglese. I would like to pass the words to Maria Fernanda, she's in the US, and she will take us through the very examples with respect to US customs and the changes. Up to you, Maria.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Good afternoon and buon pomeriggio a tutti. And greetings from the US. And yeah, we're switching to English. And yeah, let's go. Let me get you guys through an explanation of the situation that we have, a little bit of an overview, some of the impacts, and so on. Okay. So first of all, I'm going to explain the authority. This just means the regulatory base under which the president or the administration in the US is acting. I'm explaining this at the very beginning. So when I referred to Section 301, 232, and IEPA throughout the presentation, you know what I am talking about, okay? So Section 301 is an article in a particular act. We're not going to get too much into details, but this section and this law allows the president to impose tariffs every time there is a discriminatory or they consider that there is an unreasonable trade practice. This is not new. This has actually been going on for a while, and there is a lot of goods, that are in this article that have duties that are made in China. So we kind of call it the, China goods, China tariffs right here, Section 301, mostly applicable to China. Then Section 232 is a different act, is a different body of law, but it also allows the president and the administration to impose restrictions, again, tariffs, whenever they feel that there is a threat to the national security of the United States, whenever they feel that we are becoming too dependent on a particular product or on a particular country, and this is actually problematic for the nation, then they can impose tariffs under Section 232, okay? And then finally, there is another body of law that's called the IEPA. This is the International Economic Emergency Economic Powers Act. And what this act does is, again, gives the administration authority to impose such measures like a tariff in response to a national emergency. For this to happen, for any tariff to come live, there needs to be a national emergency declared. And actually, back in February of this year, what President Trump did is he declared two different national emergencies. One was because of the health crisis as a result of the imports, illegal imports of opioids, the fentanyl, coming into the US. And under this, he imposed tariffs for Canada, for Mexico, and for China. I will refer to it throughout the presentation as the IEPA, maybe opioid, okay, so that you remember that one. And then there was another national emergency that was declared based on unfair trade practices and the large trade deficits that the U.S. has. Basically, that the U.S. is importing way more than what it is exporting to the other countries. And as a result, there is this trade imbalance. So he declared this as an emergency. And as a result, he imposed a tariff called the reciprocal tariff. So you will hear me talk about IEPA reciprocal. And this is a tariff that he imposed to all of the countries in the world. Okay, so those are the authorities. Now, what did he do? Let's go and see an overview. Okay, so to give you an overview of what has happened, and this is actually where we are at today, because since February, this same tariffs that I just mentioned have actually changed over the course of the weeks, of the days. But today, if we take a snapshot, this is where we're at. On the IEPA tariffs, we have, as I said, for China, this is the opioid, as I mentioned, the national emergency of the health crisis, 20%. This is for goods made in China and Hong Kong that are imported into the US. In addition, China has a 10% reciprocal tariff. This is the other one, the other national emergency. Right now is at 10%, but it went all the way up to 124% some days ago or weeks ago. But right now, again, it's at 10, okay? This one is on a pause. And on August 12th, is supposed to go back to actually what it was in the bill at the time. The law was 34%. So this 10% will change to 34 as of August 12th. Then we have for Canada and Mexico, they have only one of the IEPAs, the 25% of the opioids. And this applies only for the goods that are not eligible or that are outside of the treaty that they have between these three North American nations, the USMCA, the US, Mexico, and Canada agreement, okay? And then for all the other countries in the world, including Italy, today there is a reciprocal tariff of 10%. There is a pause because some countries had more than this 10%, some 40-some countries, and actually the European Union as a union had 20%, but this was paused, and this pause expires on July 9. What does this mean? That as of July 9, if nothing else happens, Italy, to use as an example, will go up to 20% under the reciprocal. But as of today, it's 10. Section 232, we have autos and auto parts, 25%. There is an exception for the UK because they've actually reached an agreement, and 50% for steel and aluminum products. Now, I want to draw your attention to this one of the 50% of steel and aluminum products, because now this includes derivatives. It means that household made goods that include steel or aluminum actually have to pay this tariff, and they have to pay it in the percentage of the content of steel and aluminum within the product. I want to just stress here that it's not all of the products in the world. It's actually a list of HTS codes, but I have to tell you, it is a lot of products, and it is a lot of household, meaning goods, sport apparel, and things that we commonly use in the house. That's already included here as well. And then the de minimis, the US had a de minimis from $1 to $800 for all the countries. All the shipments with that value came duty-free. Now they don't. Since May 2nd, for goods made in China and Hong Kong, no more de minimis there. The other countries in the world continue to have the de minimis, but the administration has threatened and has stated, and it's their will, to not have a de minimis for the other countries any longer. As of today, I cannot tell you when that would happen, but it's safe to say that the US is moving towards that direction. Okay, so let's see the impact of all of these changes and all of these tariffs. In the US, we have 3 thresholds under which we import, right? So up to the minimis, $0 to $800. Again, I pretty much just explained, we continue to have that for all the countries except for China, goods made in China or Hong Kong. Then you have an informal entry. Informal entry is above 800, so 801, all the way to 2,500. If you look on the column to the right, you can see the duties that are applicable here. The duties, by the way, are the same for informal or formal, but it's showing you all the duties that I just explained. So as an example, we have the general duty rate, which varies by commodity. Depending on the commodity, it's a particular duty rate. Section 301, as I explained, for China, basically. Section 232, if it's an automobile, auto parts, steel or aluminum, and the AIPA. And you will have one of the 2 AIPAs that we just talked about, the opioid or the reciprocal, okay? And then formal is pretty much the same duties, it's just shipments above $2,500. But the difference with the formal, I'm sorry, it's in the process itself, because when you import it to the US, formal shipments actually require the ultimate consignee tax ID. And that's not required for the informal entry. And then in addition, the merchandise processing fee, that is like $1.30 for the other shipments. In this case, it's a percentage of the value of the good. It has a minimum of $32 some, and it's a maximum of $634. So this is really the impact to the process. But let's go and see a few examples so that hopefully we can clarify and explain a little bit better, okay? So this first example, we're taking here apparel, it's a jacket, and this shipment contains 3 items. The shipment value is $600. The items inside the shipment, you can see to the left, is 1 jacket from Italy, valued at $200, the same jacket from Colombia, valued at $200, and another jacket, same jacket for this example, made in China for $200. The 3 of them added, $600. You would say, this is a de minimis shipment. I would say, well, it's below $800. However, we have here an item from China, made in China and Hong Kong. So as a result, the whole shipment is taken out of that threshold, and it's now an informal one, okay? And everything has to pay the corresponding duties. What are those duties? For Italy, we have the general duty rate for this particular type of item. Remember, it depends on the item. That is 8.5%. And then the reciprocal, that as of today, is 10%. For Colombia, there is a treaty. There is no general duty under that particular treaty, but it has the 10% reciprocal as every other country. And then for China, you have a general duty for this particular HTS. You have the opioid, 20% AIPA, and the reciprocal 10% AIPA, okay? And then in addition, there is Section 301 for this particular types of products. So you can see in this example, a 600 value shipment is paying $184 in duties, okay? So next example, it's actually a simpler example. This is really 2 goods, kind of similar to the prior example, that it's below the threshold of $800. None of them are actually made in China or Hong Kong, and therefore, even though there are duties that are applicable to this particular overcoat, they don't apply here because the product, the shipment goes through de minimis, and therefore there is 0 duties on this one because the value is $200 below, and there is no China or Hong Kong made. Okay. On to the other example. This one actually, I'm going to explain this whole thing of the content and what I mentioned on steel and aluminum. Okay. So again, another shipment below the de minimis threshold, 638. However, as you will see on the left, there is an item from China. So this one is a tennis shoes from Italy, a bunch of jars of tennis balls made in China, and a couple of rackets also made in Italy. Again, you already know this has content from China, so it's not de minimis. So we now have to calculate all the duties and taxes that are applicable, okay? The tennis shoes from Italy, this particular shoes have a general duty rate from Italy at 20% plus the 10% IEPA. You already know that. The China ones, the balls, this HTS does not have a general duty, but it does have the two IEPA ones, the 30 and the 10. And then other duties, section 301, this particular item does have a 7.5. Then on the racket, and this is really where I want to draw your attention in this example, these rackets are actually made 50% of graphite and 50% of aluminum. I don't really know if this is common. We just made up this example, but let's assume 50% of aluminum, right? So you would have the 3.9% of the general duty, and then there is a 10% reciprocal, right? However, this one is not going to be applicable in this example. Why? Because we actually have aluminum. And the aluminum, as I explained to you, it's 50%. But you don't need to apply it to the entire value of the racket since 50% of it is graphite. You only apply it to the 50% of the aluminum. As a result, this shipment is going to pay $192 in duties, and that's it. Okay, so hopefully these examples clarified a little bit how the tariffs work. I know it gets a little bit complicated because we have quite a few. But let's see how you can, when you ship to the US, make sure that you ship successfully, that you don't end up paying additional duties that you don't need to pay, and that your shipments don't really get delayed at the border. So for that, we're going to talk about data and quality and what you need to do on that front, okay? When you ship any shipment, if you maybe go to the next slide, we actually have a lot of data that we need for a shipment. We need, as you can imagine, the shipper information, the address, the consignee information, the address. I'm not going to talk about all of the data elements that we need for a shipment. I'm just going to talk about 4 key data elements that are crucial for us to know which duty you need to pay. The duties, as we saw, will vary depending on the type of good and the country of origin. So we're going to cover all of those things in detail. So let's start with goods description. This is a key data element. There are several, like the general duty rate. It applies based on the good. So you need to provide a very accurate good description. Saying clothing is not enough. It needs to state the material that it is made for. By the way, the substantial material that it is made for, right? It needs to say what is going to be used for. If it is a blouse, a female blouse, or if it is a child apparel for sports, because the HTS would actually apply based on the particular code, and the tariff would significantly vary depending on the description. So here's an example of, you can see on the left what is unacceptable. That is too general. If we get that, we're going to have to return that shipment, or that is going to be delayed until we actually get the accurate information we need in the commercial invoice, okay? What is an acceptable definition is if we can take here parts of pumps for liquids fitted with a measuring device made of 100% of steel. In this case, it's 100% of steel. Imagine if this had only 30% of steel. It is in your best interest to write this, because that way you will only pay the steel 50% duty on the 30%. So keep that in mind. Always give us a very good description, okay? The next one is, it's an HTS. This is tariff classification. So tariff classification, maybe we go to the next slide. Yeah. Tariff classification is, we take that common language in English that describes the product, and we simply assign a 10-digit HTS code, which is the harmonized tariff schedule. The first 6 digits are global from the World Customs Organization. Every country has them. The other 4 are specific to the US. If you do not know what is your HTS code, we can help you with that. I know my colleague Andrea will talk a little bit about this. We do have a tool, My GTS. It's a web tool that you can go, and based on the plain language that you write, it'll facilitate and it'll give you an HTS. But he'll talk more about it. But with me, just keep in mind, either you give it to us, which would be fantastic because you know your products better. And the HTS varies significantly. There is not one single HTS for a shoe. It really varies on the material, what the purpose is. If it's a boot, if it has leather, if the sole is of different material, all of this might have different HTS. And as a result, there might be a different duty that applies to it. So we really, really, really need to have the accurate HTS, okay? So now we know we have a good description that it can be translated into an HTS, which is what we will use to assess the duty. Now on to the country of origin. So I just explained duties based on the type of good, but there is also duties based on the country of origin. What is the country of origin? For the US, the country of origin is the country where the good is manufactured, okay? Or if it's something natural, like a plant, where that grows, okay? So it is where it is made of. There was another question in another webinar. Somebody asked, do I have to write country of origin in the invoice, or can I just put made in? I think both of them are sufficient, as long as you explain, or either of them, as long as you explain that the item at line item level in the invoice, you explain where it is made of. You already saw the duties that you would have to pay if it was made in China as opposed to Italy. So obviously you need to explain that. If there is a doubt, because let's say you have products that you do manufacture in Italy, but let's say you buy components in China, let's say you're manufacturing a blouse, but you have the silk, you get it from China, the buttons, you get them from Malaysia, maybe there is a zipper that you get from Brazil, and you get all of these products and you manufacture, and you do have a genuine question as to, is this actually made in Italy? Is this product, is this going to be interpreted as manufacturing? There's a link on this slide that it's right there in blue. It's a binding ruling program from CBP. You can write CBP is the Customs and Border Protection, here the authority at the border of the US. And they allow you, or they can actually support based on your descriptions. They will provide guidance of what the country of origin is. So use it if you feel that you need it. But again, it is of utmost importance that you understand this definition. Let's see with a little bit of examples what, again, country of origin. So the first one is very easy. A product manufactured in China, and it's actually shipped to the US. What is the country of origin? Absolutely, the answer would be China in this example. Let's take the second one. The same product manufactured in China, but it goes through Italy. And not only a plane that flies there, you can even say that the good was unloaded in Italy, and it was placed there, and it stayed in Italy for weeks. And then, it doesn't matter, eventually from Italy, it went to the US. So that was the last place that it departed from before getting into the US. In this case, the answer is still China, because the product was manufactured in China. It was not manufactured in Italy, and shipped from is not the same as country of origin, okay? So this product was made in Italy. Let's see other examples. This product was made in China, so it is China. I don't want to confuse. I hope that's clear. Example number 3, it's actually a t-shirt that is made in China, okay? And then it flew to Ecuador, so similar as my Italy example. But in this case, in Ecuador, they affixed a logo. They put a nice little logo on it. And so they unpacked it, they manipulated it, they put a logo, and then eventually from Ecuador, after workers in Ecuador put that, they shipped it to the US. Here the answer is that good is still made in China, and the country of origin for purposes of the duties is still China. The reason for it is because affixing a logo does not mean substantial transformation. It did not change the purpose or the nature of that good. It is still a t-shirt that was manufactured in China, and therefore the duty for China, for goods made in China, will apply in this example, and not Ecuador, okay? In example number 4, a little bit different. This is a guitar that is actually made in Vietnam, But here, let's say the components are all coming from other countries. We continue to use China as an example, but it doesn't matter. You can imagine any other country where the wood, the nylon strings, any other component that you think a guitar might need is coming from other countries. And then somebody in Vietnam is assembling the product and is putting together the guitar. And then from Vietnam, it flies and it's imported into the US. In this case, the country of origin is Vietnam because the nature of it completely changed. A wood can be used for many different things. The purpose of a guitar is completely different, even if it's entirely made of wood, let's say. So hope you can understand with these examples and hope I was able to clarify what country of origin means. At the end, the conclusion with country of origin, you need to specify at line item level, every single item, where is your good manufactured, because the duties will apply, some duties will apply based on this, okay? So we already know goods descriptions needs to be very accurate and thorough. We have duties that apply based on the different duties. The HTS is what actually going to give us the number in the catalog that we know to use to apply the particular duty. And we now know country of origin. Now, the last element that I want to talk to you guys about is customs value. So the duty will apply to the base to calculate the duty will be on the value of the good. In the US, customs value is the value of the good alone. It excludes international freight, insurance, and any other charges. But for this to actually work, let's say, you need to actually be very clear in the invoice that the good value is a particular value and segregate it from others, because otherwise you might end up paying a little bit more duties. Let's take these two examples to explain this point. So in my example to the left, the good value is $100. There is insurance, there is freight. In fact, the seller in this case maybe pre-calculated the duties. And at the end of the day, the buyer here in the US did pay $165 in this example. However, the customs value is $100, okay? So the duties will be assessed on 100, not 165. In the example to the right, same product, same thing. However, here, there is no segregation in the invoice. And obviously, how would the authority or how would the agent know what to base it on? So here they did take the 165 in my example. So if you do want to avoid paying unnecessary duties that you don't really have to, really do please segregate, okay? So goods description, tariff classification, country of origin, and customs value. Those are our core elements that if you really give that detailed, thorough, line item, accurate, you're going to guarantee being compliant, being on time, and really accelerating any movement and preventing any delays. There's no way around not paying the appropriate duties. There's no way of saying, I am going to segregate a $2,000 shipment into several de minimis shipments to not pay duties. That is not legal. That is not compliant. You cannot do that. De minimis is only $800 in value for a particular consignee per day into the US. Do not even attempt to split shipments into this. Do not even attempt to write the other country of origin, something that is not accurate, because at the end, again, not compliant, and obviously that's something that we don't want any of you guys to do. Let me give you a couple of other key factors for you to take into consideration to further avoid any delays. This is kind of common that we see here in the US. As I explained at the beginning, the formal entries, so entries that are above $2,500, require an ultimate consignee tax ID. Okay, so that is the person that is receiving the goods here. And that person needs to have either, if it's an individual like I am, I do have a social security number. You need to provide that. Or if it's an entity, it's called an employer identification number, EIN. There is another one less common, which is the customs assigned importer number. But the first two are the most common. And if you do not provide that to us, we're going to have to call the consignee here in the US to get it. And as you can imagine, that is going to, probably incur delays in the clearance of that shipment and ultimately in the delivery. So keep that in mind. Formal shipments above 2,500 do need this piece of data. Then powers of attorney. Powers of attorney actually, for the most part, in the US, there is not a requirement of a power of attorney because it's a formal or informal, not at all. It really just depends on the circumstances. I would say they're not as common. A power of attorney is required at the time of import by the importer. So if the particular product or the transaction that we're asking needs a power of attorney, you will need to provide that, because otherwise, again, just as we're going to do with the ID, at the importation moment here in the US, we're going to incur delays because we're going to have to call the importer to get the power of attorney. I'll give you an example, which is kind of rare when you would need a power of attorney. In one of the examples, I was mentioning a product from Colombia. There is a treaty there between Colombia and the US. And if they do want to benefit from the treaty and not pay specific duties, the general duty, then a power of attorney is needed, for example, whenever we are trying to get the benefit of the treaty. So again, I'm really, this is a webinar and I'm just going to explain kind of the general about power of attorney, unless it's something like a specific commodity that is heavily restricted or things like that. We won't be requiring that, okay? Something that just came up, I'm sorry, thinking of the example I gave you of Colombia, if there is a treaty between countries, the treaty is still respected. However, the IEEPA tariffs continue to be applied regardless of the existence of a treaty or not. So this IEEPA reciprocal, the 10%, that is probably going to go up on July 9th, apply regardless of any treaty in place. Okay, so hopefully that explains, again, where we're at. Complicated, different tariffs. They do vary by type of good and country of origin, and it is of utmost importance that you provide at line item level the description of your goods with kind of the materials they're made of, so that the appropriate duties can be assessed. So with that, I think I will turn it over to you, Andrea, okay?
Thanks Maria for your precious insights. Now let's switch in Italian. Bentrovati a tutti e adesso vedremo insomma insieme quelle che sono un po' le soluzioni. Quindi Maria ci ha parlato di quelli che sono i cambiamenti e l'importanza del data quality. Ora vedremo insieme come diciamo DHL può supportarvi in questa parte. Andiamo nella prossima slide. Quindi diciamo quelle che sono le soluzioni che possiamo offrire e che sono le più richieste diciamo da parte dei nostri clienti, sia in termini di tool ma anche proprio di prodotti offerti, riguardano sia gli aspetti diciamo doganali ma anche di prodotto. Quindi diciamo vedremo insieme un po' di più nel dettaglio quello che ci ha anticipato Maria, quindi un tool che si chiama MyGTS a supporto diciamo nell'identificazione sia del codice doganale ma anche di informazioni legate alla documentazione e tutto quello che può servirci per esportare negli Stati Uniti, alle soluzioni che possiamo offrire in termini di prodotto. Quindi a partire da quello che è il nostro fiore all'occhiello, quindi il nostro servizio Time Definite International per esportare in modo semplificato negli Stati Uniti ma anche in tutto il mondo, quindi attraverso uno sdoganamento semplificato che possiamo offrire a servizi più dedicati e settoriali, come può essere il servizio Medical Express che offriamo diciamo per coloro che hanno questo tipo di esigenza e una necessità di controllo accurato legato a questa tipologia di prodotto. Per poi passare a una soluzione che in particolare in questo caso verso gli Stati Uniti può semplificare ulteriormente ma anche ottimizzare tutta quella che è la parte legata a dazi e tasse applicate sui prodotti esportati. Ora entriamo un po' più nel dettaglio del tool MyGTS. Quindi MyGTS sta per My Global Trade Services, è un tool in lingua inglese e accessibile gratuitamente al link che trovate all'interno della presentazione che poi vi trasmetteremo comunque, però lo potete già visualizzare e può fornire informazioni doganali sia per effettuare una pianificazione della propria strategia di vendita in tutto il mondo, ma diciamo con particolare focus in questo caso negli Stati Uniti, e a comprendere quelle che sono le documentazioni che ci serviranno appunto per esportare. Quindi il tool è in grado, Maria ci ha parlato di quella che è l'importanza di andare a identificare l'harmonized code, quindi il codice doganale che servirà poi in dogana per attribuire dazi e tasse. Se non si conosce il dettaglio appunto del codice, il tool attraverso una descrizione è in grado di identificarlo e andare ad attribuirlo all'articolo esportato. Oltre a questo, il tool è in grado di calcolare un costo totale comprensivo di dazi e tasse che andrò a sostenere per la mia esportazione, quindi sia legato alle operazioni doganali, ma anche per pianificare appunto una strategia di prezzo che sia poi coerente. Come accennavamo prima, non solo questo, ma legate a alcune specificità di prodotti particolari, è anche in grado, di fornire un rimando a quelle che sono le regolamentazioni del paese legate ad alcune tipologie di merce, quindi siano esse requisiti doganali, ma anche documenti richiesti ai fini dell'esportazione. Oltre a questo, avendo un accesso dedicato, è possibile salvare i dati in modo tale che possano essere poi utilizzati anche per spedire non solo negli Stati Uniti, ma anche nel resto del mondo, e quindi andare a pianificare una vera e propria strategia per effettuare poi il business all'interno del mercato prescelto. Direi passiamo ora a quella che è la soluzione che abbiamo accennato prima, che si chiama break bulk. Quindi abbiamo visto prima nella presentazione di Maria che cosa è cambiato dal 2 maggio, quindi quali sono state le implicazioni legate al de minimis per le merci prodotte in Cina a partire da tal data. Quindi le soluzioni che abbiamo per far fronte a questo cambiamento sono legate sia al nostro servizio standard che abbiamo visto prima, il nostro servizio Time Definite International, ma anche potremmo utilizzare una soluzione break bulk. Facciamo degli esempi concreti per andare poi a capire un pochino quelle che sono le differenze. Quindi prenderemo un esempio legato a una spedizione di merce prodotta in Cina di 100 colli che andremo a spedire. Quindi nel primo caso, attraverso l'utilizzo del nostro servizio Time Definite International, andremo appunto a ritirare le spedizioni che viaggeranno all'interno del nostro network aereo, per poi arrivare in dogana ed essere sdoganate singolarmente. Quindi appunto a partire dal 2 maggio non avremo più uno sdoganamento semplificato legato a merce prodotta in Cina, ma dovremo seguire un processo formale. Quindi queste spedizioni saranno assoggettate singolarmente a uno sdoganamento, e quindi ci troveremo a sostenere dei costi legati sia all'anticipo di dazi ma anche tasse locali. Potete trovare un dettaglio e avremo in questo caso un costo unitario di circa $18,31. Nel secondo caso, attraverso invece il servizio break bulk, prevede che in fase originaria, quindi di raccolta della spedizione, ci venga fornita dal mittente in modo consolidato. Quindi ritireremo sempre i nostri 100 colli prodotti in Cina con partenza dall'Italia, ma non come singole unità, ma in modo consolidato. Le ritireremo, seguiranno il loro transito attraverso il nostro network aereo e verranno gestite come spedizione con un'unica fattura, quindi consolidata, in dogana americana. Quindi avremo un'unica fattura, un unico dato di esportazione che verrà attribuito dazi e tasse, ma in un modo un po' differente e con un risparmio netto di costi, perché nonostante ci siano le stesse tasse applicate, avremo in questo caso un costo unitario molto più basso. Quindi negli esempi che vi abbiamo riportato avremo nel primo caso, abbiamo detto, un costo unitario di $18, in questo caso di circa $2,44. Il servizio break bulk può anche, abbiamo detto che la merce deve essere consolidata, è gestibile anche in modo non consolidato, ma con una spedizione di singole unità attraverso un servizio che è il medesimo, che si chiama loose break bulk. Chiaramente questi due ultimi servizi hanno delle regolamentazioni che devono essere rispettate, come quella di avere un importer of record, quindi un rappresentante doganale in loco e un destinatario unico per la spedizione. Quindi diciamo, l'invito è quello di rivolgervi a uno dei nostri consulenti commerciali per andare ad approfondire e comprendere, diciamo, al meglio il vostro business case e come potervi supportare.
Grazie Andrea, passiamo adesso alle vostre domande. Abbiamo ricevuto molte domande dall'inizio della presentazione. Prima di tutto volevo chiarire che nei prossimi giorni riceverete i materiali che abbiamo presentato oggi e le risposte a tutte le domande raccolte durante il webinar. Passeremo adesso in rassegna alcune delle domande più frequenti. Maria, I will need your help to answer the many questions that we received so far. So I will start with this one. We import in the US high-value products in casing of aluminum. The aluminum is a high percentage of the weight of the product, but represents very little in terms of value. How should we declare the amount of aluminum in the product?
So the product, the aluminum percentage is based on the content of the product, not necessarily either the weight or the value. So if it's made, I don't know, remember my bracket example, and it's half of it, but it's really the lighter part of it, it doesn't matter. You just have to state the component of the product. If it's, you know, X percentage of it is aluminum or not. That's it.
Is it not enough to just write leather bag in the invoice description? Do we also have to include the material of the components like buttons or zippers? I think you touched upon this, but just to clarify one more time.
Yes. No, you don't have to. So in the line item, if it is a blouse, it is enough to write, let's say it is made of silk, maybe silk and cotton, if it's substantial. But if the zipper is made, I mean, those are kind of little components that are not what is needed. No, you just need to write the relevant, you know, substantial components, basically.
And we have to declare the value of insurance or freight in the shipment, even if the duties won't be paid on them?
You don't declare them in the sense that a duty will not be assessed on them. If you do have them, do separate them and do segregate them, because otherwise, how do you know, not combine that with the value of the goods? So if you do have that, you do need to segregate that in the invoice. That's all.
And are there differences among the US states, or is it all the same no matter where I ship?
Okay, this is a very good question. All ports of entries into the US will apply the same law. So it is irrelevant, not only geographically, it doesn't matter, or if it's imported by different modes of transportation, whether it's ship or air or road. So the application would be the same across the entire country.
And products subjected to tariffs on steel or aluminum, will they also be subject to reciprocal or China tariffs, or do the latter prevail?
Okay, that's a good one, because I have to tell you, we have like a cheat sheet of the order and the order in which they apply. So when it comes to section 232, which is your auto or auto parts or steel and aluminum, this is where you have to, I would say the order is, you have your general tariff, and then after that, you have your section, your auto and auto part. If it is an auto part, that's it. You don't pay anything else. It's that 25%. But if it's actually, let's say, if it's not an auto part, you continue down. If it's steel or aluminum, you're going to pay the 50%. You do not pay the reciprocal either. You don't go down. You don't pay the reciprocal. If it doesn't have steel and aluminum, then you do pay the reciprocal. So again, the reciprocal 10% does not apply if you have a section 232. Okay.
We're getting lots of questions about exempted HS codes, so specific HS codes that will not benefit of all these tariffs, like, for example, electronic industry, the famous Apple list among customers. Some customers are asking about books. Where can they check if their products are exempted?
So there is actually very good guidance in the page that DHL has, and we supported uploading information in this kind of task force webpage, and I think we'll probably cover this. There is a link to a lot of information from DHL. My team in particular, for example, provides slides and information that will take you to the links of the government, because this is all public information, and guidance from CBP that give you all of the list of HTS that are relevant. So for example, for steel and aluminum, there is a list, and CBP has put guidance out, and you can just see the number and the HTS, and you can see which one it applies or not. So we can't really cover that in a webinar, but CBP has actually put this in terms of guidance. If you cannot go to the CBP website directly, if you go through the DHL, tariff workforce website, I think that will direct you to that as well for that type of information.
Great. So my GTS can also help with that, the tool that Andrea mentioned.
Correct. That in addition to, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm going to try to build up a common question from two different elements. So first of all, at the end of this grace period, do we switch directly to the 20% reciprocal tariffs? And for example, in general, for made in Italy, do we need to consider 20% general duties plus 10% additional duties for all made in Italy products?
Okay, so let's start with the general duty. The general duty will vary by product. So I don't know if it's 20% or 10%, for apparel might be different and so on. So the general duty continues to apply. Nothing happens with it after July 9th, and it varies by commodity type. That continues. After July 9th, if nothing else happens, so the question is, does it automatically, change to 20? Yes, that is the answer. Unless, and I think we have seen the president making announcements like on the very last night or things of that sort. But let's assume nothing happens. Yes, automatically, because the executive order already stated 20%. And then it's just simply paused. Again, once the pause finishes, you just go back to the 20%. So effectively, if nothing else happens, yes, you have your general duty rate from Italy, whatever it is, depending on the good, and then you start applying the 20% for the IEEPA reciprocal, which, as I mentioned, there are several countries and that varies among them. So there is a list as well, public information, and you could see the country of origin and the applicable list if they do have this adjusted reciprocal above the 10%.
Customers are asking how to handle the country of origin for made in Italy machinery, for example, that have multiple parts from different countries. So, for example, is design and assembly considered a substantial transformation?
So let me just give you, because though there are very specific questions related to certain products, but as a general rule, think of the guitar example. In that example, that was precisely intended to explain that if the components, the components are made from in any other countries, you can, as a general rule, I would say that would be manufactured in Italy. But again, there are some nuances here, depending on the type of products, depending if it's, electronic, but for the most part, if it's assembled in Italy, it would be considered made in Italy, regardless of where the origin products are.
Okay. And I think this is perhaps one of the most common questions about steel and aluminum. What happens if we don't have the composition of an item? So, for example, bolts or screws, these might be made of steel, made of aluminum, but the percentage are not available. What happens in this case?
So two things. If that is subject to this HTS, well, you will not be subject to this duty. You will not be assessed the duty because the item itself, it's not subject to the duty. But if it is under the particular list of HTS codes, if you don't have it, you're going to be charged, or you're going to be levied the still 50% of 100% of the item, unfortunately. So it is very important that if your item is part of those list of commodities that are subject to this particular duty, that you do put the right description. Otherwise, if the agent and the authority cannot decipher the percentage, they will assess it on the entire value of the good.
And the last question of today, again, one of the most common ones, what is coming next? What can we expect in terms of customs and regulatory updates in the US?
Okay. So the situation is super fluid. This is changing, pretty much every day. So just, I would say, stay tuned. But next, I would say, first of all, July 9th, definitely the pause will end for the reciprocal tariff unless something happens. So that's one thing to expect. August 12th is another date where the reciprocal for China pause will end. And then the de minimis. The de minimis is actually right now in as part of a bill that is being, as we speak, is being voted on in the House of Representatives here in the US. So I don't really know what will happen. We do need a crystal ball for that one, but I would say it is safe to expect that de minimis for the rest of the world might end eventually. Just simply cannot give you a particular date.
Thank you, Maria. Passo adesso la parola a Martin per riepilogare gli aspetti chiave della sessione di oggi.
Grazie. Arriviamo un po' alla fine della sessione, quindi prima di chiudere, spero questa sessione è stata utile per chiarire un po' la complessità di nuovi dazi, perché sicuro sono vari cambiamenti, abbiamo provato di chiarire un po' le sfide, ma anche la complessità, e spero i vari esempi sono stati un buon aiuto per chiarire la situazione e come si deve fare lo sdoganamento e chiarire tutti i componenti dei vostri prodotti. Questo uno. Poi Maria è stata secondo me anche molto chiara l'importanza per i dati, per essere più chiaro con i dati, non solo dal punto di vista finanziario, ma ovviamente anche creare un processo molto fluido durante lo sdoganamento in US e così evitare gli ostacoli, ma anche i costi in US per fare lo sdoganamento. Oltre a questo, tutto ciò e anche la complessità, mi rendo conto probabilmente ci sono ancora altre domande dalla vostra parte. Ovviamente la mia organizzazione di DHL è a vostra disposizione, quindi potete contattare sempre i colleghi di sales, i miei colleghi, ma i vostri riferenti commerciali sono a vostra disposizione in caso ci sono ancora domande, per chiarire come potete andare avanti con le varie domande e chiarire ovviamente le domande che esistono ancora. Quindi direi dalla mia parte grazie alla partecipazione, lascio l'ultimo pezzo secondo me ancora a Rina.
Per aiutarvi a tenere il passo con la situazione in continua evoluzione, come ci ha spiegato Maria, condividiamo il link in fondo alla slide dhl.com/tariffs e vi invitiamo a visitare e salvare questo sito. È il sito che aveva citato Maria, dove pubblichiamo a livello di gruppo gli ultimi aggiornamenti con l'impatto sulla logistica, e qui trovate materiali scaricabili che potete condividere al vostro interno. Trovate anche registrazioni dei vari webinar che spiegano l'impatto delle tariffe in vari settori. Nei prossimi giorni riceverete i materiali che abbiamo condiviso oggi e le risposte alle domande raccolte, le risposte che Maria ha fornito durante la sessione di oggi e anche di ieri del webinar, e risponderemo a tutte le domande raccolte. A nome dei relatori e del team DHL Express vi ringraziamo per il tempo che ci avete dato oggi. Speriamo che il webinar vi sia stato utile. Vi auguriamo una buona serata e vi ringraziamo a tutti.
Grazie.